You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 252. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Welcome to today's podcast episode. I'm delighted that you have decided to press play and join me and my guest, Allison Wolf, for a conversation that is designed to help founders and small firm or solo firm owners navigate the wonderful challenge of growth. Yes, growth. Allison Wolf, if you are not familiar with her, is a lawyer coach, and she is one of the OG in my world in the sense that she has been a coach for lawyers for over 2 decades. And what that means is that Allison is one of those people with such a breadth of expertise and experience. She has been coaching lawyers long enough to see the evolution of their careers over 2 decades. And Allison has worked with many founders of solo practices, small firms, lawyers who inherit firms. And so what she has been able to do is to see what some of the common challenges are when you experience growth, right? When you start to hit up against bottlenecks and roadblocks and all the things. And today she is here to talk about what some of those challenges are and to support you, to help you to figure out how you can work your way through them. So what you'll hear about in today's episode are some of the common challenges that lawyers face as founders and as the leaders of solo practices where there is growth, you're bringing on a team. You will hear about some ways to navigate those challenges. You'll hear about the role of culture and strategy, and you'll learn about how you can create an environment where you and your team are all going to thrive. So if this is something that you're experiencing right now, this is the perfect episode for you. If you know somebody who's in this boat, please do share it with them. They will appreciate the wisdom that Allison has to share. And with that, I'm going to turn us over to the recording of our conversation. I know you're going to love hearing from Allison, and so enjoy the episode. Allison Wolf, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
I am fantastic, actually. Yeah.
I am so glad you're here. And I know our listeners are delighted because today we're having a conversation about founders. We're talking about growth and all the challenges, right? It's like your success brings along some perhaps unanticipated surprises. And so this is a great opportunity for us to have a conversation. This is an area that I know that you know very well. And so I feel like you're the perfect person to be here today. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you to all our listeners who are here with us as well. Allison, before we dive into our conversation, what I'd love for you to do is to let our listeners know, for those of them who may not be familiar with your work, you are a lawyer coach. And can you please tell us a little bit about the work that you do with lawyers?
Paula, let me just say it's just a pleasure being here with you today, and I appreciate the opportunity. My work with lawyers began 22 years ago as a coach, and dare I say, before that, in the 90s.
Love it.
So for those listening out there, yes, you will see some gray in my hair. And I've had
strands of wisdom. Sorry to interrupt. Strands of wisdom.
I love it. That's what I'll say to myself when I look in the mirror.
Me too.
And I've had a chance to work with all kinds of people over that time. Associates, partners, counsel, in-house counsel on pretty much anything that comes up in a legal career that you didn't get taught in law school. And I have to say, 22 years in, I'm as happy with the work and with what I'm doing as I was in my first few years, if not happier. And I'm really happy to be invited to speak with you about founders because these days my practice is increasingly focused. I still do all the things, but there is a special niche of clients near and dear to my heart who are the people who are leading small, mid-sized firms. These are the folks who are working with those firms of fewer than 20 lawyers, fewer than 10 lawyers, fewer than 5 lawyers, that group. Because there's so many interesting challenges that come up for lawyers at this firm and for founders, for leaders of firms at this stage or at this size. So yeah, it's definitely a sweet spot for me. And these are people I love working with.
Amazing. And sadly, the listeners don't have the benefit of seeing you talk about the work that you do, but you can just tell from the expression on your face, you were made for this. And 23 years is impressive. You are certainly one of the leaders in this area. I have certainly looked up to and admired the work that you've done with lawyers, and you've paved the way for lawyer coaches like me to know that this is an option, right? This is something that we can do. And just to see the way that you have impacted the legal community is amazing. It's impressive. And on behalf of the legal profession, thank you for the work you're doing. It's brilliant. You mentioned that more recently, your practice seems to have this increasing number of lawyers who are these founders. You mentioned the smaller firms, the solo firms, the firms that are 20 members under-ish. And I just wanted to highlight for our listeners that you have a program just to highlight the Flourishing Law Center, because I think that's something that is unique. And what it creates is a bit of a hub for those people who may not have, I come from a larger firm practice background. And so typically in large firms, there's a whole, dozens, if not hundreds of people who are there to run the firm, which is quite different. If you are in a 20-person firm, you do a lot more of that in-house. And so what I love about having you here today is that you really have got that perspective of what it looks like. And you've also been serving this community. And so you're able to talk about how you match the problem with the solution. So thank you again for being here and talking about this. So we're going to start with a question that really goes to the heart of what we're talking about today, is that as firms start to grow, you're a solo practitioner and you start to reap the benefits of your business development, or you've brought a full practice with you and you're busy, right? So you're starting to grow, or you're a leader at a smaller firm, smaller in terms of number, and you're finding, you're so busy, right? There's so much work. It's an embarrassment of riches, however that expression goes. What are some of the challenges that you see among founders as their law firms start to grow?
This is a great question. And I love that you mentioned the embarrassment of riches in terms of a lot of work and a lot of clients. That's what I see more often than not. There's a lot of folks out there in the ecosystem, on LinkedIn or on Instagram, consultants who are all talking about the latest marketing strategies, business development strategies, AI search, etc. Really focused on getting law firms to spend money on those services to bring in clients. Great, I get it. However, from my seat, it's not so much the let's get clients in, but oh my gosh, we've got all these clients and we've got to serve them. Plus, there's the 1,000 cuts a day of administrivia. Administrivia, let's call it that.
It's a good word for it. It's exactly what it is.
I wasn't sure if I was pronouncing that fake word. And it's things like, Janice decided to work from home today, and I don't have time to get that binder together for her because she can't do it. She's not in the office. Or, can I take holiday next week? Or this paralegal and this LAA are a little bit at loggerheads. Or like the 101 things that come up. And you're thinking to yourself as the founder, but I've got to get this done for this client, this done for this client. I don't have time to be dealing with these things. That I find is the biggest challenge in growth. It's managing the people. And I want to back up for a second and just let's get to the heart of this. What are legal businesses? Legal businesses are people businesses. The money, the profitability of a law firms are paid to produce, to create something, which is the intellectual output of their lawyers, supported by their staff. So law firms are people businesses. The tech stack is great. It can help so much in smoothing and reducing friction in various parts. And this is true today. You still need your people, and people are complicated. And when you're a small growing firm, you're doing this without having like an HR director, a chief administrator, a COO to really handle some of that day to day. And so this is where the pressure point really becomes hot. This is what I'm seeing in firms all around the country. And that's okay because you can work with this, right? If you've got a good stream of clients, you've got some good support staff, this you can work with.
I think that's such a great frame for us to have to think about this, because it really is, it's so much boils down to the people. Even as you're talking, I'm thinking this is something that AI just cannot replace. It cannot replace the interaction between two human beings, at least not yet. And in my experience as a lawyer and also with lawyers, there is so much training and emphasis put on the practice of law itself. And when you move into a role where, yes, you continue to practice law and you've now got a business to run, a firm to run, people to work with and to support you, it adds a new dimension. And often we do not have the training to step into that. And we may not know what to expect. We step out with this vision of what the firm will be about. And as it happens so often in life, the vision and the reality, they feel different. In the vision, we probably didn't have the LLA and the LA that were at loggerheads, but that's the reality of it. And so I love that we're having this conversation because it's probably resonating strongly with anybody who is a founder, who is, as we speak, trying to manage all the different pieces on their desk. And for those who are anticipating this is their dream, this is the problem that they want to have, they're now seeing it in the horizon, and so they can prepare for it. So I love that. Allison, one of the things that we've talked about in the past, and I'd love for you to share this with our listeners, is the idea of strategy and culture and how those two fit together, in particular in the context where you're running a firm.
So at a high level, strategy provides you with your guiding path. This is where we're heading. Hey, guess what? We've got our map out and we actually know kind of what we're about, why we're doing what we're doing. And we share that information with people in our team. And we have these projects that we've decided are really important for us to be looking at this year. And we have some parking lot ones for the next year, the year after. But these are all moving us forward towards that vision. That's the guiding path. But who's going to do all the things? Well, it's you and your team. And where does that energy come from? Well, it comes from people being engaged and motivated. That's culture. Culture, which is sort of what's it like to work at your firm? What are our systems and processes? What are our values? Like, how do we treat each other? This all contributes to what we call culture, which is the driving path. And candidly, I've had my head deep into culture for the last 2 years. Because when I started working in the legal profession I wasn't practicing lawyer, I was in the marketing business development area for law firms. But when I started working in law back in the 90s and then early 2000s, what is culture? What is a law firm culture? I mean, it was the big question mark, right? How do we even describe it? And how is our culture different from the culture of the firm down the street, right? Really murky. And then you're going to go and you start reading Harvard Business Review if you're a geek like me, reading about culture, looking books and whatever. And my gosh, does it seem complicated? So this past couple of years, I've really put my head in to what is this about culture? Because culture is the driving path. It is what gets us to do all the things that are in that great guiding path. And so, how to make our cultures places that really generate that motivation and that engagement so that we do the things and we take that guide and we drive it. There's a really funny expression that my friend Karina Biddle, former COO, and she's one of my colleagues who's in the Flourishing Law Center with me. She talks about plans that have a bad case of POTS. And POTS stands for plan on the shelf. So what I'd like to say, you're talking about the relationship between strategy and culture. Culture is what gets that plan off the shelf and open on the desk and deployed.
I love that. That POTS example reminds me so much of those New Year's resolutions that we make that are just I'm going to change everything from December 31st to January 1st. And you lay out this beautiful plan. But if you're not going to act on it, it doesn't get you there. And that's where I think this culture question, as you've described it, becomes so relevant. And as individuals, we need to ask ourselves, with what culture do we want to execute in our own lives? And as an organization, what does that look like? And so, for example, if a culture is, we are a work hard culture, work hard, play hard culture, that's one description. If it's more of we want to be really supportive, we believe in mentoring, we want to foster the growth of our team, regardless of where they end up. There's these different cultures that it's almost like if you imagined articling students running around on the streets or soon to be articling students interviewing for positions and they're asking each other, what's this firm all about? That's in a way a snapshot of the culture, at least as perceived by the outside world. And so I think we want to be so mindful about how it is, how we motivate ourselves. Are we motivating ourselves through a shared vision of the future? Are we motivating ourselves through the fear that I'm going to get in trouble if I don't do this? Because what if so-and-so gets upset? So it's embedded. It's embedded in how things are done. So I love that you've highlighted that as one of the key elements.
I've got two important streams to kind of share on this point. The first one is I just want to do a shout out to people right now. If you're a founder or you're leading a small firm and you're feeling really overwhelmed, and I'll tell you, this is what I've got in mind. You've got so much work. You're feeling overwhelmed when you look at what's ahead for you this quarter and the next. You actually don't know how you're going to do all the things, and it's really stressing you out. And it's really hard to stay positive. And you're managing all the business of the firm, right? So you're in serious overwhelm. I just want to, say, I get it. That, this happens. And when you're hearing about a strategic plan and culture, all that's just like, oh my, I can imagine it landing on your shoulders so heavy. Oftentimes, one of the first things that has to happen when you're in a situation like that, there is a digging out of the work that needs to happen. And the second piece is often there's a hire. Oftentimes when we're working on strategic plans for small growing firms, one of the first things that will come up was, you know what, it is time to hire. It's time to hire that administrator. And there's often this feeling like, oh, is it too soon? Do we have enough money? Can we afford that salary? And I just want to point out that what's really important is that the time that you get back to do your billable work, to give to your clients, taking a whole load of minutia off your plate, the mental reward of that, all of this makes it an extremely good investment, which I can tell you, you will be able to afford. You'll get it back in terms of increased billings, but you'll also get it back because of the energy that will return to you and what you'll be able to bring to the position. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's probably the first step. And then what you can do is come back and listen to this presentation about strategy and culture after you've done that. Now, on to culture. I have some things to say about culture. So what you talked about was really interesting, Paula, talking about different kinds of cultures. There's two layers to culture. This is kind of coming out of my work of these past 2 years. There's two layers to culture. The bottom layer is what I am now promoting as what you want to build as your cultural operating system at a law firm. And I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell, and I'm going to tell everyone who's listening, I've been writing about this for slaw.ca, so you can find it there. You can also find a link on my website, thelawyercoach.com, with a resource kit that gives you a presentation on this and a handout. But in a nutshell, for this conversation we're having, I am huge on aligning how we handle our people with how human beings' brains work. Because for a very long time, these have been at cross purposes. And we have a huge advantage today. We know how the human brain works in a lot of ways we didn't know before. Neuroscientists are giving that to us. People like David Rock are breaking it down and make it easy to understand. So when I think about that first layer of culture, I'm thinking about here are the pillars that you want to put in place through the way you approach feedback and performance, through your systems and processes, right? And through your team building initiatives, layer these in so that they are creating positive cues that the brain is picking up as it's scanning the environment. Our brains scan the environment every second of every day. The brain is taking in information from outside and from inside the body. And one of the things it's scanning is the social environment. And there are particular cues that the brain is really sensitive to. And when they're present in a positive way, it generates a reward. Oh, this looks rewarding. This looks good. The brain responds with some positive chemicals. You get a feeling of leaning in, of heightened engagement, heightened motivation. Or there's the stuff that if it's missing, it's like it comes out as a threat and you have the reverse output. And so often we see firms have in the past just cued threat, cued threat, cued threat. An example of a cued threat. I'm a partner. I like to work with my associate in the way that I had to work with the senior lawyers I worked with my whole life, which means that we work together and I give them the red line draft after we finish the work, and that can do the talking for me. That associate can look through that and see all the changes that were made and then learn from that. But I don't want to provide too much in the way of positive feedback because I really don't want them getting a big head and think they're better than they are. This is the kind of thing that is creating negative cues, right? Whereas a little bit of feedback, hey, you know what? I saw you've really improved here. You did this well. Next time, here's what I think to be thinking about to bring it up another notch. This kind of feedback starts to create a really good positive cue, as well as the messaging. You know what? I really see potential in you, and I'm here to help you continue to grow and develop. I'm here to help and support you. All of a sudden, we've got reward cues just going, often are in the associate's head. We're now getting a spiraling up of motivation and engagement. That's how it works. So in the articles, the resources, I lay out what all the cues are, but there's 5 key cues. This is neuroscience. This is the human operating system. Whether you're working in Belfast, whether you're working in Vancouver, whether you're working in Durban, these are the cues because we're all human and we have this operating system. So baseline, you build a culture that has these positive cues built in. Then layer it on top of, and you do that because this is what gets people to work and perform well. This is what gets that intellectual output that you're looking for. Yes, it's nice. Yes, it makes a good work environment. Yes, it could be perceived as being kind, but really, it's just smart business. Then on top of that, you layer on, now this is where you get your own special sauce, your own special flavor. What kind of firm are you? Those 5 positive cues, I need to say something here because it can be misunderstood. We're not talking about work-life balance. We're not talking about a firm that you can be that hard charging firm. You could be like a corporate finance firm where you've got very demanding clients, it's fast paced. For sure, those 5 cues can be layered in on that firm and that lies on top of it, right? People are at your firm because they're attracted to that kind of work. That's what they want to learn. That's what they want to develop. They like that fast paced work of deals. So not to mistake, these 5 cues, the baseline is really all about how do you build cultures no matter where your firm is or what it is that's going to support a strong performing team. And layered on top of that is your special sauce for what your firm is all about. Your values, your vision, what it takes to succeed at our firm, that kind of thing.
I love that. Allison, you have highlighted something that I think is so key, not just for lawyers, but for all humans, which is the idea that we need to work in a way that supports our basic biology, our basic neurology. And you're reminding me of something my daughter and I did this weekend. So you mentioned you've been in law firms since the 90s, right? And in the 90s, I think I was a student. And there was a very different way of teaching when I was a student relative to my children. My children are 11 and 13, elementary school, just starting high school. And so what's so fascinating is to see how teaching has evolved in the years since I was a kid. And so I was brought up in a very top-down. Teacher is correct, student is wrong, and you just deal with it. I'm Gen X. And so for fun, I will tell my children stories, childhood stories about how things used to be back in my day. And for fun, I went through an exercise and I dragged my daughter to my computer. I said, you have to check this out. And I asked ChatGPT for a list of examples that teachers used to do, such as call out a student in front of the whole classroom and announce their grade, their bad behavior, whatever it is that you wanted to shame so that student would never do it again. And I made a list and I think I asked for 10 prompts. And of course, ChatGPT, being the obedient, wonderful friend that it is, it provided all these examples. Then what do you do instead? And to me, this is a smaller example of what you're saying, right? We now have so much more information about how humans learn, right? How we best perform. And whereas, that thing you said about, this is how I was brought up in this law firm. This is how my mentor or boss, this is how they treated me. Therefore, I'm going to do the same and you're going to be just like me. You're going to succeed. It's not necessarily the best model, right? Depends on who your boss is. So I just love that you're talking about the ways that we can structure ourselves, right? Build in that foundational culture so that this is how we're learning, right? We're supporting people to grow.
Yes. And there are so many founders who start their firms because they want to do it differently. Yeah. They really want to do it differently. They've been through the wars. They've got some trauma. They want to build their firm. And I applaud that. And the purpose of the work I've been doing in the culture space is that I understand the desire to do things differently. And they'll have a bunch of good ideas, but they'll be missing some pieces, right? I wanted to be able to equip people like that with here's the recipe card. So a lot of this you may already be doing, and you may have forgotten these couple of pieces because we all have blind spots.
Yeah. And I think that's why the education part is so helpful, right? It's like you can sit there and guesswork your way into figuring it out, or you can have the benefit of having somebody who can help you with models, with structures, with frameworks, with processes, so that you may not have the process and apply it perfectly every time, but you've got some tools now that you can work with. And tools other than this is how it was done when I was being raised at a law firm. Love that. Allison, in terms of, example. So let's say you're in a situation, right? You've got a team member who maybe isn't performing at the level that you want them to be performing. What recommendations would you have there in order to help that person improve their performance?
It's a really great question. And it's so interesting because we're kind of, with that question, helping somebody improve their performance, we're jumping into that story several chapters in. So how effective you can be in that moment is going to happen. Let's call it chapter 4. You're there in chapter 4. How effective you're going to be in chapter 4 has a lot to do with what happens in chapters 1, 2, and 3 with your relationship, your working relationship with that junior. What kind of communication have you had with them? What's been the relationship? Like, what's been your approach as a leader? All these things will either bring you in chapter 4 to a place where this is somebody who you have had good feedback conversations with and back and forth, or it may be someone you never really have had what I would call a trusted working relationship with any degree of psychological safety. So it really matters what happened in chapters 1, 2, and 3. However, regardless, in that moment, what you need to do is, again, it's about being clear and kind, but clarity. And it starts with feedback, which is this, you've gotten to this stage in your practice and working with me. And for you to go to the next level, the essential thing for you to be able to keep developing and doing this work is this skill set needs to improve. So the focus now needs to be on improving the skill set. And here's an example in the recent piece of work you did of where it was and where it needs to be. So what we're doing here is we're feed forward. You've gotten up to this level. Now to take it to the next level, it's about making this shift. Let's talk about that. Where do you see the challenges there? Like, tell me about how you're taking this on. Oh, the person looks a little emotional. They're kind of shaken up, right? Sometimes this sounds like, and also maybe I need you now to take more initiative on files, take more leadership of files. This is, going back to the cues, this is a cue that's going to signal threat. It just is the way of it. So what may need to happen in that situation is, hey, why don't you go off and just take a moment and just think it through. And then let's have a conversation about like what it might look like to improve the skill or where you might need support or what your questions are. Let's come back and pick this up tomorrow and then schedule it. If they look like they've been thrown, because chances are they've been thrown. And now if they've been thrown emotionally, now they're no longer really able to do their best thinking. And you kind of want them to have their head in the game. So then come back and then say, okay, let's talk it through. And now you're being a bit of a coach. This is where you're going. Here's the gap. What are your ideas? And now you patiently get them to talk through what they're thinking about, their ideas, question them, help, give them support, provide some suggestions, and then give them an opportunity. Assuming best intent. Assuming this person's going to give it their all in best intent. And you see what happens. The person may rise to the occasion. You might see him, catch them, look for opportunities, watch whether you can catch them doing things well. It may be that they're just not able to make that leap. And, that really depends then on the individual. You've kindly set the stage. You've been very clear about expectations. You've given them a chance to help co-create solutions, to help build up their skill level. Now it's up to them. Are they able to meet the challenge and make that developmental step? And if they are, great, they're going to keep stepping up and up. And if they're not, it may be then that's a conversation, which is, it's been great working with you, but this piece is a non-negotiable. We've been working at it for 3 months. And I think, whatever the conversation is, it's, at that point, you're having an exit conversation, which is something different. And, in exit conversations, we don't give reasons, but coming back, in the lead up to that, people can see the writing on the wall, but hopefully they make the leap. There are times when I think that, because you can have a great culture, and that doesn't mean you're not going to have to let people go. You're going to have to let people go. One of the biggest challenges for growing firms is getting the right people in the firm. It's really hard. I know great firms, and in the first few years, it's all about people in, people out, because you're trying to find the right people for the firm that you're building. And then once you get them in, you want to keep them. But that process can be challenging. And some people, when they run into those initial problems, start to think, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. This is too hard. What I would say is, no, stick with it. Stick with it. Keep working to find the right people and get them in the seat. But where I was going with this performance question is there's some times where you need to move more quickly on moving someone out of the firm. And I find that's with issues where you're seeing somebody who is actively, I don't want to use the word destroying, but actively harming the culture you're seeking to create. When you have somebody who's engaged in negative gossip, or who's back talking about you as a founder to others, or openly stirring dissent, and I've seen this, you get these personalities in firms, right? And it happens. Those are the people who need to be moved out as quickly as possible because they damage and they'll hurt your culture.
Thank you so much, Allison. I just want to circle back on a few things that you said that I'd just like to highlight because I think they're so important. Number one is just that trust, right? The process that you've described where there's that communication, there's the trust built up, there's the assumption of positive intent, there's space for conversation. It doesn't mean that the person may not have that response that you mentioned, right? It's perceived as a threat. But within a container where you've got that level of trust, I imagine over time you're building that up, right? The threat feeling will not be quite as pronounced when the person who's receiving the feedback starts to see this is a safe place. Like the goal here is my performance truly. It's not a trick. This is actually, they mean it. They're trying to help me improve my performance. So I think that trust is huge. And I think also the specificity, right? Clear as kind. If you give somebody feedback that was terrible, there's nothing there for them to work with. If you give them very specific, here's some of the things that happened here that I'd like to see different, here's some ways that could look, you're just giving that person a path to follow. This is no longer vague. So I love that. I also think that point about giving people space sometimes, right? If what you're doing is giving constructive feedback, for some people, that will really trigger that, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and they don't have full capacity to think in that moment. And so giving them a bit of space, making it clear that this is not shame, go sit in the corner for 5 minutes and then come back and apologize to your sister. It's not that. It's let me give you some space because I'd love to have this conversation after you've had a chance to think about it. So all that is just really helpful. You mentioned also this idea of hiring, right? And growing. And this is a question that I hear quite a bit with lawyers that I work with who are starting to see their firms grow and they're debating, do I bring in a contractor? Do I bring in an employee? And so I would love to hear your thoughts in terms of what factors somebody might be considering when they're weighing those options.
Great. And I'm going to put that pin in that question for 1 second only. I want to let people know. So I referenced a resource kit on my website and give you the link, Paula, so people know where to find it.
Absolutely. And Allison and all our listeners, we will link to all of the resources in the show notes. So anybody who's looking for those, the notes will contain all the references. And I meant to say before, Allison, thank you for the links and the resources. We will link to those with the episode.
Okay, great. Because there's a resource on feedback. So
beautiful.
We just talked about it and there's a really nice resource there. It has, again, going back to the guiding path, right? What are you building? How big are you? What's the need? What's the job description? Doing the work of just thinking about what's the help we need here. That'll give you a sense of, is this a full-time employee? Is this a contractor? If you're a small scale and you're just in the early stages, probably you're going to be looking at a lot of contractors or fractional help to do things. And then as you start to grow, you can be considering different kinds of employees, permanent employees, and the like, right? But it's going to be really driven by your vision, what you're building, what stage you're at in your economic situation.
And one thing that I've heard, and you've probably seen, I've seen it too, right? This idea of, can you grow too quickly? You step out, next thing you know, it's the files are coming in, the clients are there, you're busy. Is there such thing as growing too fast? And if so, what are some of the telltale signs that you might look out for?
I think there is. I think it is possible to grow too quickly. I think it really, again, it comes to the people. Like when we're doing planning, we have a section of the plan that's all about the people. And the danger of growing too fast is, do you have the management structure or the support you need to deal with the people? And I say that because you're growing fast, you're bringing on lawyers, but you need those lawyers to be billing, right? You need them to become the economic engine of this growing firm. And if you're not able to invest in in the foundation, the foundation being your culture, number one, and then getting the org chart that you need to support that growth, getting these pieces kind of in place is really important. Adding offices rapidly can cause a lot of strain on a business. It adds significant costs. It splits your focus, across different offices, trying to make sure that people are operating well, that the culture is flowing across these firms, these offices. These kinds of challenges are weighty. And so you don't want to do a whole lot of it all at once. If you have a really great support team, that is going to empower you to do more. But you really have to weigh that kind of the growth against you building up your foundation and shoring up your foundations to support growth. But once you get kind of a really good solid team behind you, then I think that you've got the opportunity to maybe scale a little faster. I just want to say that it's interesting because the kind of firm you're building is going to have a lot to do with how it works as well. So, the personal injury firms that, were a huge part of our legal landscape here in British Columbia prior to No Fault, right? That's a very particular firm that highly workflow oriented, highly tech driven, highly paralegal driven, right? Where it's interesting, right? You can kind of add lots of lawyers, there's lots of files. It's an interesting model. That's a very different kind of practice to build than a multi-practice area firm. Or there's a big difference between growing a family law firm, for instance, and growing a business law firm, right? And what kind of models and what kind of speed you're going to want to work at. It's different. And there's complexities that come into play there.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I think for everyone who's listening, you're probably thinking about the nature of your firm and how it is unique, how it is different from other firms. And that is why one of the reasons that it's so important to have a vision of what your firm is, what it's going to do, what the culture is going to be, the strategy that you have in place.
I'll just say there's a provider I heard of who's really talking about, hey, I'm going to help you develop the self-managing firm.
Sounds fun.
And I was like, oh, wow, self-managing firm. And it costs about $30,000 US, I think, to get their help to do this. But honestly, if you're thinking about, sure, you could probably have a self-managing firm in certain kinds of practice areas. But yeah.
So if we're looking at a firm that's seeking out to make a plan, you've talked a few times about a plan, a strategic plan. Would you share with us at a high level what a strategic plan is, what role it plays, what maybe some best practices are? And then I'd love for you to share some of the tips you would have to actually implement those plans so they don't become the plans on the shelf.
Yeah. So just to let everybody know, I've got in the resource kit is a full article by my colleague, Karina Biddle, about how to build a strategic plan. So it's all there. But at a high point, the model that Karina and I use, and I just love what Karina's done with her approach, is we kind of do away with the whole complicated vision, mission. What's the difference between mission and vision and values and how, separating it all out? And no, what we were really interested in, we call it the house model of strategic planning. So if you're imagining a little picture of a house, we have a roof, which is the vision. We've got 3 pillars: people, clients, and work. Future is the 3 pillars under that roof. And the support is platform. And that's your tech stack and all that kind of stuff. And what we like to say about platform is you only hear about it if it's not working very well. And then it's all anybody talks about. Then you see next to your house is a little bit of a little sun, a little picture of a happy sun and a cloud. That's the environment. And then plugging into your house is the power pack, energizing the house. And that's your culture. That's the model that we work from. And the most important part, this is for firms where you actually have employees, right? Where there's a number of people working for you. So you may be 2 partners and you might have 3 support staff and 2 associates, let's say. That's a nice size. And what we would say is you always want to start with what we call the environmental assessment. And that piece is a check-in with your people about how things are going, right? Are they excited about the future of the firm? What do they see as the opportunities? Do they feel like they have the tools that they need, to do their jobs well? Is there anything they're concerned about that, might be looming on the horizon for the firm? We have a whole list of questions, right? The environmental assessment. What we've found that in any firm that has a few or more employees, this environmental assessment is so important because it provides this really great snapshot of what's really kind of happening at the firm. And it takes that, the founders to the partners kind of, I think this is going on, I think this is good, and really provides some good hard data. And generally what we find when we do these assessments is it's there's lots of good news in there. There's lots of excitement. There's lots of energy. And there's also some really good pieces that are worthy of attention. So you asked what's the most important part? That environmental assessment is really important. And because that is really what helps actually give you the intel you need when you're thinking about what do we need to be doing with our plan. And that part we actually recommend, if you can, get someone from external to do it. It's just a few questions. It's interviews, live interviews. It's a survey. It's not expensive. If you're a small firm, it's not going to cost much, but you're going to get that third-party perspective, which is so valuable. And then for the planning, if you're a small firm, you can do it on your own. You kind of think about where are we heading? What does great look like for our firm? That's always one of the key questions. What does great look like for our firm? And then really unpacking, what does that great mean? And what are the elements? Who are we working with? Why are we working with them? What are the outcomes we're trying to produce for them? Why do we like this work? What's important to us about how we work together? And you build out that nice roof. And then you're thinking about what you heard from your environmental assessment. Okay, in the people column, have we got the people we need to advance this vision right now? Are there any hires that we need to do right now? Do we need to reorganize our staff? Where are we at there? What about, are there any people processes that we need to be working on? Are there any, you kind of build out that people column. Clients, how are we doing on the business development front? Do we have any projects? Oh, we need a new website, right? Talk a little bit about that. What are our priorities? Okay, this is, our priorities for that column. Succession. This is the kind of a catch-all. We're thinking about the future. Is this something that's a kind of a pressing need for us? A lot of times it's not. Sometimes it is. And then platform, you will have heard from your environmental assessment. Is there a need to tweak your platform? Do you have the tech stack that you need? Do you want to be doing something more? How is that going to help that vision and advance it? And you just kind of go through that and you end up with a really nice, simple strategic plan with very clear action items and steps. And then you can kind of distill, what do we want to do first? What do we want to do after that? What do we want to do after that? What's in the parking lot? Welcome to strategic planning.
Amazing. Amazing. And in terms of implementation, I imagine working with a coach would be helpful, working with you in particular, working with the Flourishing Law Center. What do you recommend for people who they've got the vision and now they want to make sure they implement?
So I think what's really important for partnerships and for partners is that you are accountable to each other and that you have some of the conversations about accountability and that you don't all do all the things, but you divvy up different roles in the firm and you trust each other to get things done. Another place you're going to want to invest is in your partnership and in being able to have real conversations with each other. I don't want you to get along all the time. That is not a sign of, that is a sign to me that something may be being pushed under the carpet. You're going to have a very healthy partnership, I know. They have disagreements all the time. They're very good friends. They disagree all the time, but they work it through. They come up with a decision. Anyway, bottom line is you need to be accountable to each other. You need to divvy up the tasks. Right? And then you have regular meetings once a month. And one of the items is, okay, let's take a look at the plan. How are we doing? Have we moved the needle on this? If not, why not? If so, great. Let's sprinkle some champagne on that. Right on. We've moved that forward. Now, what's next?
Amazing. I love that. And Allison, I feel like we could have this conversation go on for so much longer. I've got so many more questions I'd love to ask you. And the reality of time is that we will need to wrap up for today. And so I wanted to thank you. I wanted to say it's been such a pleasure having you. Thank you on behalf of all of our listeners who I know are really loving what you're sharing, especially for those who are in that boat. And, I can feel the heads nodding as our listeners are following along. And as I said at the beginning, you've been doing this for 23 years. A big thank you for all the work that you've contributed, the support for lawyers across the board. So thank you for that. How do people work with you? How do we find you? What kind of support would you be able to provide for somebody who's in this position?
So first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me. Really, Paula, it's very generous of you to invite me. It's really kind. And I also want to say to the listeners, I'm sorry, I get excited and I talk really fast. And I'm very aware that
It's okay. They're listening
intense.
Where they can slow it down if you need to, 0.8, 0.7, but I thought the pace was perfect. So thank you.
Okay, good. Because I don't want to exhaust everybody. And the resource kit lives on my website so people can find me. With founders, I work with them for the Flourishing Law Center. And I'll just quickly say to everybody, I used to work one-on-one with the founders, partners of small firms, people leading firms. And I love that work. And what I found was it was a little bit like working with one hand both hands tied behind my back. Because I love coaching and it's a one-on-one conversation and it's 1 hour and you do your coaching session, but there's so much that can come up and there's so much that you might be facing in a small firm. And so the Flourishing Law Center kind of provides a 360 of support that I can't do just on my own. And it offers other advisors. So that financial person who's got that genius zone or the person who's got that COO or HR genius zone, right? They're there and they're there to talk and to provide support. And we've got education, right? So that, here's some best practices, right? And we've got community with people sharing what they're doing and supporting each other. So that's how I work with founders. And I've kept the price. I have to tell you, Paula, I know what it's like. I've I have signed up for these kinds of programs for small business owners, and I have paid through the nose in US dollar for this kind of support. So what I'm doing is really aimed for the most part at Canadian law firms. And sure, if you're listening and you're American, you're welcome, but really aimed at Canadian law firms. It's a Canadian dollar price, and it's aimed to be affordable because I have no illusions about what kind of budgets small law firms have. And I think I want it to be accessible to people and not be this big, 5-figure price tag that's going to make it really hard for people to be able to do. That's never the intention.
I love that. And I mean, that aligns so much with the work that I do too, right? It's like this podcast is an example of that. People are out there and they need access to resources. And sometimes, I've had your experience many times. Most of the programs I'm in, I'm paying US dollars, and it makes a difference. So I love that you're providing it. And I love the programs, but I love that you're making it more accessible for Canadian firms, keeping the doors open to firms from everywhere, I imagine. But it's that ability for founders who are, as I sort of alluded to at the very beginning, right? It's not a case where you've got a multi-office firm with hundreds of thousands potentially of people and resources at your disposal. It's how do I do this? And I love that you're providing that support. So Allison, thank you again. Thank you again for coming on the podcast today. Thank you again for sharing your insights. And we will provide links to all of the resources that you shared to your website. So anybody who's listening who wants to, and who wouldn't, who wants to learn more about Allison and the work that she does, you will find that. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. It's been such a pleasure, and look forward to our next conversation. That should be fun. We'll see what that might be in the future. So thank you again, and conversation to be continued. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.